Chapter 6.
One morning, a telegram arrived from America and was placed carefully on the breakfast tray, an old piece of Chinese craftsmanship that sat atop my mantel. I opened it and read, "This is to tell Western Union I love you. Will you marry me?" I never replied.
Chapter 7.
The Palais du Trocadero, built by David and Bourdais for the 1878 World's Fair, was demolished in the 1930s to make way for the Palais de Chaillot. No doubt, the Trocadero had its faults, and perhaps Chaillot is beautiful, but something in Paris was lost forever. That strange, Eastern mystery, embodied in the Trocadero's ugly, enigmatic silhouette, vanished. The Eiffel Tower, born in 1889, now gazes down in surprise and melancholy, perhaps even with a hint of fear for its own future. Monsieur Rivière, the Trocadero's last curator, gifted me its original scepter, a battered, golden plaster relic, chipped and scratched, which now leans in the corner of my library, a lost sentinel of a Paris I never truly knew. Meanwhile, the Seine dressed itself for another grand event, the 1937 World's Fair. The riverbanks bloomed with cheerful architecture from every nation. At night, music drifted over the water like magic, Bach, Chopin, Debussy. Colorful sails fluttered as small boats glided beneath the bridges, past the trousers of the famous Zouave statue. The Union of Garment Workers had a pavilion dedicated to the French luxury industry. They issued rules, many misguided, about what could and could not be done. To me, it felt like the end of individual initiative. I was Don Quixote, tilting at bureaucratic windmills. Some mannequins were so appalling, we could only conceal their flaws beneath enormous gowns. Naturally, I protested, of course I did. Resistance had become a reflex. Could I display Pascal, our wooden mannequin, and lend a surreal touch to the boutique? No, cried the pedants. Too bold, too subversive. So I staged the display myself, a gloomy plaster mannequin, naked and grim as it left the factory, laid out on the lawn. To lighten the scene, I covered it in flowers and strung a rope along my assigned space, hanging along it the complete wardrobe of the modern woman. Undergarments, stockings, shoes, even knickers, like laundry after a wash day. I followed every decree, but on the very first day, we had to call the police to control the crowd. At Place Vendôme, chaos ruled. One never knew if the day would be warm or cold, who would arrive first. Pilots, stewardesses, art students, cadets from naval academies, American mothers, tourists in hats pinned with fake jewels, queens past and present, wives of presidents and ambassadors, admirals and journalists, duchesses and would-be duchesses, and Italian princesses. Even some who worked for me, like Sonia Magaloff, Paulette Poniatowski, and Cora Gaetani, seemed to step from royal courts. One day, a woman entered, shy, awkwardly dressed, and plainly from the Midwest. She was not beautiful, but something about her moved me. Wide brown eyes like a frightened deer, soft chestnut hair, and a quiet dignity. She wanted to change. First, she cut her hair, far too short, making her head resemble a helmet. But soon her broad bones, once a burden, became her strength. She chose simple dresses that suited her frame, bold jewelry in proportion, deep hues of black and white. She married a tasteful young man who helped her reinvent herself. At home, she wore exquisite Chinese robes that gave her a timeless elegance. She became more than elegant, she was captivating. Wherever she went, heads turned. I was proud to have shaped her transformation. Tragically, she passed away, but we remembered her as a true woman, who wore my creations with profound understanding. Another client, the Marquise Louisa Casati, used to stay at the Hotel de la Reine across the street. Tall, skeletal, with coal-ringed eyes, she embodied a bygone era when wealth and beauty could afford outrageous eccentricity. She once appeared leading a panther on a leash studded with diamonds. All that remained was a velvet gown powdered white with rice flour. I sent a young assistant with a small gift from the boutique, only to find the Marquise in bed, her face painted in vampish makeup, wrapped in black ostrich feathers, eating boiled fish with Pernod, and trying on a scarf printed with newspaper headlines. In France, I always eat a French breakfast, she said. Won't you join me? Thank you, madam, I've already eaten, replied the startled girl. At night, the marquise's silhouette would emerge from the shadows, like the ghost of another Italian, the infamous Countess of Castiglione. A niece of Cavour and mistress of Napoleon III, she once haunted number 26 Place Vendôme, walking veiled and accompanied by dogs. In the same attic rooms now occupied by Boucheron, she mourned the slow fading of her almost divine beauty. Would her ghost recoil in horror upon seeing another Italian woman, one who refused nostalgia, who worked daily, unbothered by propriety? In those days, my thoughts turned often to Italy. Mussolini's rise filled me with dread. I had no taste for politics, but I feared absolute power and universal servitude. I saw Italy becoming Europe's scapegoat. The Italian youth, with their blind enthusiasm, answered the call of nationalism, never seeing the abyss ahead. I spoke openly of my concerns. Several Italian girls worked in my atelier, one especially bright and ambitious. I had found her starving in Paris and gave her a future, despite warnings from friends. I trusted her. That year, I took Gogo to Rome to visit her grandmother. She was growing up, and I felt she needed to know her roots. But our family home was cramped and crowded, so we checked into a small hotel. On arrival, we discovered our luggage had vanished. Days passed. Hotel staff answered our questions with mocking irony. What did you expect? Don't you understand modern Italy? Finally, Countess M called. You cannot possibly stay in such a place. But I have no clothes, I objected. It doesn't matter, she replied. The moment I announced our departure, our suitcases magically reappeared. Ransacked, but intact. We moved into her splendid Baroque home. I had a salon, a bedroom, and a distant bath. Gogo wandered the city with cousins, discovering where her mother once played. I reconnected with old friends and explored innovations in textiles and design. But politics found me anyway. One night, around 2 in the morning, the doorbell rang. Gogo slept deeply. I ignored it at first, then answered. 2 men in workers' clothes entered, claiming to be from the gas company. Our orders are to repair a leak in your bathroom. Please don't wake the child, I begged. They worked silently while I sat on my bed. Something told me not to interfere. Then they left without explanation. I told my friends the next day. They all cried out at once. We warned you. A few days later, I was invited to meet Il Duce. I refused. A year later, when I requested a visa to visit a dying friend, I was denied entry to Italy. The pain was unbearable, but not as unbearable as surrendering my freedom.
Chapter 8.
Listen, said Colcom, a fabric manufacturer who wasn't intimidated by my ideas, or me. There's an exhibition in Moscow. We're sending lots of textiles, but barely any people. No one wants to go. How about you? Why not you? I countered. Me? He shook with laughter. I'm so fat I'd barely fit in one of their trains. And feeding me would be a challenge. But you should go. It would be a valuable experience. To me, Russia was the land of General Durakin, beloved by the French. The land of Madame Popovsky, who would invite children over for snacks and a spectacle, watching her maid get whipped. It was a country of young nihilists casually planting bombs for amusement, of mythical emperors who could order executions with a flick of the finger and raise cities overnight, of empresses and dancers glittering with jewels. Siberia, Tolstoy, bears, gypsies, and a few dear friends who had been exiled. Yes, Russia called to me. And besides, when nobody wants to go somewhere, I can never resist. But how would I get there? Simple, he said. Who else is even going? He handed me a sheet titled, The French Industrial Design Fair. At the top were the names of high-ranking officials, Minister Edward Herriot, presidents of France's Foreign Trade Committee, the National Railways, heads of chemical and mechanical industries. There were flour tycoons, titans of textiles like Bianchini, Codier, and Colcom, glove magnates like Perrin, perfume houses, Chanel, Coty, Guerlain, spirits and champagne reps from Courvoisier, Heidsieck, Pommery, and Roederer. Department stores like Samaritain, And, for the final unexpected touch, Schiap, me, designing garments for a Soviet woman, a woman of the people. Clothes that any woman, regardless of her circumstances, could afford and wear. It was a brilliant, madcap adventure, full of irony, and impossible to resist. I received visas for myself, my American PR agent, and the English photographer Cecil Beaton. Bundled in fur-lined cloaks, massive boots, and hoods to battle the Arctic December winds, we boarded the train like true explorers on a voyage of the absurd. We sped through Poland without pause, just the two of us. Cecil had been forced to disembark in Warsaw due to issues with his papers. I last saw him pale and dazed on the snow-covered platform. Luckily, he rejoined us the next day. At the Russian border, we changed trains. On the vast, empty station walls hung countless propaganda posters. We endured a polite yet thorough inspection. The sleeping cars were filthy. My bunkmate was a rather large, rather unwashed man who reeked. Our cabin locked with a sliding bolt. The dining car, however, had a strange charm, a faded echo of Maxim's in Paris. Red velvet, Art Nouveau decor, and a table groaning with hors d'oeuvres, vodka, and caviar. Only the gypsy band was missing. Outside, the view was oddly hypnotic. Endless flatlands fenced by miles of barbed wire, like a sinister forest of metal thorns. At last, we arrived in Moscow in the biting frost. Before the train even came to a full stop, hundreds of women leapt onto the steps, clinging like monkeys, furiously washing away the dirt from the carriages with buckets of icy water. Foreigners had arrived, from the outer world, and every trace of contamination had to be scrubbed away. Dressed in heavy coats, men's winter overcoats, black headscarves, and clunky boots, these small women struggled visibly, yet moved with such courage and agility that even circus acrobats would have envied them. The inevitable, intourist, representative whisked us away to the Metropole Hotel, one of Moscow's finest, they said, where we were given rooms that were relatively comfortable. The sheets were torn, and the bathroom taps were dry. But when I looked out the window, the view was astonishing. The Kremlin, up close, grand and immutable. Nowhere, not even Rome or the vast, mythic west of America, had I seen such a spectacle of raw, unyielding power. It is not a beauty that appeals to lovers of Louis XIV's grace or Dresden porcelain's delicacy. No, the Kremlin is barbaric, colossal, and towering, like jagged mountains howling their defiance. No one has ever brought us down, and no one ever will. On our second day, we were invited to a cocktail gathering at the French embassy. The ambassador's wife, gracious and curious, asked if she could assist me in any way. Without hesitation, I replied, I would love to visit the Kremlin's treasure halls. I adore jewels. She looked apologetic. I'm afraid that's impossible. No one is permitted to go there. Only moments later, Lady Chilston, the British ambassador's wife, posed me the same question. I gave the same answer. She paused thoughtfully. I'll try, she said, not very hopefully. To my astonishment, she called the next morning in great excitement. Permission had been granted. I could visit the Kremlin's hidden treasury, with the British ambassador himself, and bring Cecil Beaton along. With an armed escort, and momentarily liberated from the constant shadowing of the young intourist chaperone, we entered the fortress and passed through the heavy doors into the Vault of Wonders. Inside the endless halls were glass cases filled with gold, emeralds, rubies, crowns, and ecclesiastical robes of dazzling splendor. One robe, in particular, enchanted me. Made of apricot-colored velvet, embroidered with enormous pearls and green gemstones. I found myself thinking, foolishly but irresistibly, if only I could try it on. There were gem-encrusted horse harnesses, Fabergé eggs in quartz and white enamel, and a surreal bestiary of glittering creatures. Perhaps it all lacked utility, but it offered joy, wonder, and work for so many artisans. But who, I wondered, would ever again create something so extravagantly magical? I saw Empress Catherine the Great's gowns, so stiff with embroidery that they stood like hourglasses, dainty waists exaggerated by thick, unyielding fabric. Later, we strolled around the inner city, the Kremlin within the city, visiting churches filled with ancient power. In the Archangel Cathedral, I noticed missing stones in the massive columns. Napoleon's horses, explained the guide. They were tied here when he entered the cathedral on horseback. We're restoring the damage now. I asked no further questions. A breakfast at the British Embassy offered gourmet delights, most flown in by air. Lady Chilston, ever gracious, made me feel completely at ease throughout our stay. Outside the embassies, however, food bordered on farce. My companions persistently demanded salmon or entrecôte minute, and reacted in feigned surprise when these dishes failed to materialize. I, instead, devised my own reliable menu: dry black bread, caviar, always, occasionally sevruga, and vodka. Caviar was scooped from vast barrels of polished mahogany in grocery departments, ladled out like porridge. I swear by it, it's the perfect slimming regimen. I returned to Paris thin as Gandhi, and radiant. Our train, carrying the materials for our exhibit from France, had mysteriously vanished, leaving us with abundant time to explore. We visited the Museum of Modern Art. To my disbelief, I found Cézanne, Matisse, and the Great Impressionists. Paintings hung all the way to the ceiling. There, too, were Picasso's Blue Period Harlequins. Who had selected them with such sensitivity? The viewers, mostly workers and peasants, removed their shoes at the door, as was customary in all museums. They studied the art silently, with heavy expressions. Their hearts, however, belonged to the Museum of Icons. The Virgin and Child gazed down with divine calm, their silent presence pressing against the encroaching modern world. The icons, sublime Madonnas hovering in blue skies, seemed almost to mourn the present. Eventually, the Museum of Modern Art was shuttered, deemed too decadent, and its collection vanished into obscurity. I did enjoy some theater. Beyond the grand operas and ballets, I saw a staging of the Pickwick Papers. Even without understanding Russian, I followed along easily. Dickens translated into Russian felt oddly surreal. The costumes were wildly imaginative. In Leningrad, I saw Tom Sawyer, played entirely by children on abstract wooden sets, reminiscent of Chinese opera staging. But nothing left a mark like the endless queue in Red Square to view Lenin's tomb. I stood in line, half frozen. Inside, his waxen figure lay in a glass coffin, surrounded by soldiers. "Keep moving, move along," the guards barked. There was no time to truly see him. We visited Tsarskoye Selo, outside Leningrad, the palace of Catherine the Great. Its immense halls were adorned with faux marble, amber, lapis lazuli, and diamonds. A banquet table stood ready with Meissen porcelain and Augsburg silver. Each room was watched by a little woman in black, reciting the only French phrase she had been taught: "Ne touchez pas. Ne touchez pas." At last, we reached the emperor's private apartments, modest, dimly lit rooms crowded with trivial but intimate objects. Photographs, calendars, and calendars still marked 31, the day he had abruptly fled. His enormous bathtub glowed from within, lit so no one could hide in it. The Empress's bathroom shimmered like it was carved from blue opal, but was, in fact, just glass, padded with sky-colored flannel. Her wardrobe remained untouched, perfectly arranged, as if she might return at any moment. And then we entered a windowless little room, a secret gathering place for the imperial family. The door was secured with a thick iron bolt. It was a place built for refuge, and yet, it had failed to protect. Across a vast white plain, endless and silent, a small red dot began to emerge, growing larger and clearer. From beneath the snow, a poppy had bloomed without sun. But as it came closer, I saw it was a rectangular box, draped in crimson cloth, pulled by 2 gray horses. A peasant sat at the reins, 2 others walked solemnly behind. A funeral, I realized. A rural one, sorrowful, isolated, without any religious ritual. Then, something astonishing. From one peasant's arm hung a piece of black cloth, gently stirred by the wind. For a split second, the face of the Virgin Mary flickered into view. I could barely believe my eyes. The coffin continued on its slow journey, shrinking back into a red dot until it disappeared completely on the white horizon. Later, Passing an airfield, I saw large airplanes preparing to land when, suddenly, nurses, tables, and heavy medical bags came falling from the sky. The nurses quickly freed themselves from their parachutes, opened their cases, and within seconds had assembled a fully functioning open-air operating room. Parachuting was a popular sport in Russia. Even children jumped from tall towers in city parks. In my Leningrad hotel, silver lamps and quartz ashtrays were chained to the walls. Each morning, a smiling maid brought me a half-used sliver of soap. Breakfast was served on mismatched fine Chinese porcelain, with silverware in a dozen different patterns. The Neva River had frozen solid, its ice forming frozen waves, a sight entirely new to me, as if a giant with icy hands had halted the current in an instant. The city itself felt like a forest cast in stone. Peter the Great, lacking actual trees, had created a magical forest of rose-pink buildings rising toward the sky like stone trunks topped with golden oranges. And yet, a melancholic sorrow lingered in the streets. The paint on the buildings had peeled, the grandeur felt faded. In Leningrad, as in Moscow, even leisure felt somber. People seemed burdened by struggle, as if they had forgotten how to laugh. In the museums, however, glittering treasures still shimmered. The Hermitage rivaled the great European museums with Dutch, French, and English masterpieces. Across the hall was an exhibition of Persian art, centuries-old tents embroidered with gold and vivid silks, glass-painted ornaments, and lush carpets. It was like a mythical caravan had stopped to rest in the snow. But the streets remained grim, watchful, as if the city were under siege. Moscow felt slightly more animated. There was a quiet resentment toward Western civilization, especially American culture, yet the desire to imitate and compete with it was unmistakable. A massive statue of Stalin had been erected, an eerie phantom of modern art, grotesque in form. American-style skyscrapers stood awkwardly amidst Eastern architecture, like misplaced children. The people looked uncomfortable in their clothing. European fashion did not suit the Russian climate or spirit. This, I realized, was the East's great sartorial mistake, trying to dress like the West. Shops attempted to sell foreign goods. Preoccupied with ermine, I searched for Russian furs, but found only a bizarre pelt that looked more like a rat than a luxury item. The only place where strange and marvelous objects could still be found was the mysterious Torgsen. In that enchanted store, I stumbled across a silver mirror from the Directory period, complete with at least 30 intricate accessories. I couldn't afford it. Instead, I left holding a large gilded silver coffee pot, which continues to bring me joy every time I use it. Soon, a rumor began to spread. Schiaparelli has designed a dress for the Soviet woman. Meanwhile, Stalin had decreed that his officers must now wear proper uniforms, with gold stars, tailored jackets, and trousers with dramatic stripes. They would learn to foxtrot. The commissars would wear golf knickers. And soldiers? They were expected to teach their wives how to dress well. A sensational headline spread through the Western press. I had supposedly designed the future wardrobe for 40 million Russian women. One story even claimed that the wife of Stakhanov, the famous coal miner who inspired a national labor movement, was gifted a car, a bank account, and a haute couture dress by none other than Schiaparelli. Contrary to all these absurd rumors, what I had actually designed was a modest black dress, typical of my own style, with a high collar, suitable both for work and the theater. I often wore such dresses myself. Along with it, I envisioned a wide red coat, lined in black, fastened with large, simple buttons, and paired it with a woolen knit cap that anyone could easily replicate. It had a zipper and a little pocket on the front. That last feature, however, was rejected by my hosts. Too tempting, they said, for pickpockets on public transportation. My exhibition booth was decorated with scarves patterned like newspaper clippings, prints that would later become universally popular. In front of the display, we laid out fashion magazines from France, England, and America. These caught the greatest attention. Many young Russian women had never seen a real fashion magazine. They were far more interested in how to create a new dress than in how one simply looked. One day, having forgotten something in my room, I returned to my hotel unexpectedly. Just as I opened the door, I heard startled exclamations. Inside, my dresses were spread out across the floor, and 4 women were frantically removing the dressmaker's cartridge tags. They all began talking at once, as if I understood a single word. I sat down on the bed and burst into laughter. Then, to their great surprise, I used gestures to show them a faster and more reliable way to remove the cartridges. I was invited to inaugurate the first house of fashion on Sretenka Street. That morning, I had breakfast with the wife of the Chinese ambassador, who had somehow managed to find fabulous furs. I arrived a bit late to the house of fashion and found myself in a rather small room filled with people, yet it was impossible to tell who was who. Social distinctions had been erased. Beneath a glass dome, electric mannequins rotated slowly, wearing some very strange outfits, at least, strange to me. I had thought workwear should be simple and practical, yet here was an orgy of chiffon, velvet, and lace. And where exactly is one supposed to wear this? I asked. To a concert? I soon received a reply in kind when I mentioned cocktails. What are cocktails? Well, it's when you drink vodka after work. But why would you change clothes just to drink? Through a translator, I was peppered with questions. How many hours is your workday? What are your wages? What do you eat? What do you do for fun? And your personal life? How much time do you work yourself? I answered clearly and honestly, as best I could. From somewhere in the back of the room, a voice rang out. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. Only later did I learn that most of those present were members of the government. It was my one and only direct encounter with real Russians. The editor-in-chief of the most powerful newspaper later invited me to lunch in a private dining room at the Grand Hotel. The food was exquisite, the French wines excellent, and the china was the best Russia produced, Popov. I have a bad habit of checking the bottom of plates. I left feeling strangely shocked. At the border, an officer asked why I had kept newspaper clippings. I replied, "How kind of you to notice. Perhaps someone might be willing to translate them for me?" They did. The train was delayed. I left the country with the firm impression that modern Russia is, in many ways, just as Marquis de Custine had described it in 1830. Only the ruling class lives well. Modern Russia has opened itself to the Western world but suffers deeply from an inferiority complex. To replace religion, they have embraced the idea that Russia is destined to convert the world to a new doctrine. But to love and to be loved, those are two very different things. Perhaps that's why Germany has occupied France more than once, because they love Paris. My trip to Russia had 2 strange and direct consequences. The first, a drawing, a caricature really, by the artist Miguel Covarrubias. The original remains in my possession. It shows me parachuting down in a red jumpsuit, conversing with Stalin, who is in green, also suspended mid-air by parachute cords. The drawing was published in the final issues of Vanity Fair, 1936, under the title Possible Interviews, with the imagined dialogue. Stalin: "What are you doing here, seamstress?" Schiap: "Conducting a survey of your women's wardrobes." Stalin: "Can't you leave our women alone?" Schiap: "They don't want to be left alone. They want to look like the rest of the world's women." Stalin: "Like those emaciated, flat-chested dolls from your dying civilization?" Schiap: "They're already admiring our mannequins, our models. Sooner or later, they'll embrace our ideals." Stalin: "Never, as long as Soviet ideology lives." Schiap: "Look down, man of steel, beauty schools are rising, hair salons are opening. Fashion will follow. In a few years, you'll see no more headscarves." Stalin: "You underestimate the soul of Soviet women." Schiap: "And you underestimate a woman's natural vanity." Stalin: "Perhaps I should cut your parachute cords." Schiap: "100 others would take my place." Stalin: "Then I'll cut mine." The second result of the trip was a new silhouette, the parachute dress, a narrow bodice with a full skirt, divided into wide panels. Women who embraced this design looked like floating flowers as they walked. Once again, I had created something no one expected, even from a designer who had just returned from Soviet Russia.